Frequent speaker on musical topics, Jamie has presented talks around the world, from conferences in Japan to seminars at Harvard University. In her role as broadcaster, Jamie has produced and hosted shows for radio stations in the United States and Great Britain. Jamie is the co-director of a prize-winning film documentary, Crescendo, The Power of Music, which is available on Amazon and iTunes, which focuses on children in struggling urban communities who participate in youth orchestra programs for social transformation. Jamie's articles and poetry have appeared in such publications as Symphony, Double Take, Town and Country, Gourmet, Opera News, and Musical America. She also edits Prelude, Fugue, and Riffs, a newsletter about issues and events pertaining to her father's legacy. Jamie is a devoted mom to her two grown children, Frankie and Evan. She's an avid Scrabble player and tennis player, and makes an annual pilgrimage to the Utah desert to recharge her spiritual battery. Jamie resides in New York City. So I'm very happy that Jamie was able to join us for tonight. So now I'm just going to read two short excerpts. One is from a New York Times review by Alexander Jacobs in August of 2018, where it says that the memoir is wry and wonderful, and that Jamie is a warm but unsparing eyewitness. And then from the June 2018 David Denby review in the New Yorker, it says that A Famous Father Girl is unique among classical music memoirs for its physical intimacy, its humor and tenderness, its ambivalence toward an irrepressible family genius. It's a startling inside view. It's a story of encompassing family love, Jewish American style, with all its glories and corrosions. It's truth-telling rather than dignity is her goal. So with that, I think this is a good lead-in to the first excerpt that Jamie will read. So I'll turn it over to Jamie right now.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. I know I look a little funny, but that's because although I do normally reside in New York City, I am currently in our old country place in Fairfield, Connecticut, which, if you have read my book or do read my book, you will learn lots more about. We've had it since I was 10 years old, and we're so glad we have it, because it's a pretty great place to be spending this awful time waiting for the coronavirus crisis to subside. So I'm here at the moment with my son, Evan, and my brother, Alexander, and his daughter, Anya, who is desperately trying to finish her senior year at Vassar, somehow doing it online and on Zoom. And of course, our internet went out today. So I'm talking to you all from my phone, and I'm outside where the connection is a little bit better, but not great. So I hope this works, and it's going to start getting dark pretty soon. So anyway, before it does get dark, I will read you this little excerpt, which is just a part of my book where I describe what it was like in my early adolescence to spend time in public with my father. And you know, when you're like 14 years old, you're very fragile and vulnerable and sensitive. So you can probably imagine what it was like when the following thing happened. And I quote from my book. While it was fun to get all the extra attention in public, which was inevitably generated by being in the company of my very famous father, I could never be sure what Daddy was going to do. On winter break, I went with him and my brother Alexander to the brand new ski resort in Vail, Colorado. One night, we all went to Casino Vail, a disco. They began playing the theme from Zorba the Greek, of all things, and Daddy grabbed me. And the next thing I knew, we were dancing full tilt to the bouzouki music, just the two of us, while the crowd made a ring around us, clapping in rhythm and egging us on. Daddy pulled out a handkerchief and was waving it around above his head. And then he was down on his knees. I danced in a circle around him. I mean, what else could I do? I was trapped, a mortified moon doomed to eternal orbit around an ecstatic, sweaty, handkerchief twirling sun. And that is a sort of, encapsulation of what life was like around my dad a lot when we were with him in public.
Thank you, Jamie. That is a very good introduction to the book. Well, my first question is, had you thought about writing this book for a long time before you actually wrote it? Were there some false starts? And how much were you motivated by the centennial of your father's birth, which was 2 years ago in 2018, when the book did finally come out?
Right. Well, all my life I was a kind of scribbler, and I loved writing, and it came to me pretty easily. And, I would have loved more than anything to write a book, but I had no self-confidence whatsoever, and I did not even allow myself to imagine that I could ever write a book. So even if I went in a bookstore and I was looking at a bookshelf, I would not allow myself to fantasize that maybe I could have a book on that shelf one day. No, you can't think about that because it's never going to happen. Okay, so that was my mindset. But I've been keeping journals for years, and I had always just had it in the back of my mind that there might be a way. So I was having a conversation one evening with an acquaintance who was a book agent, and confessing some of these notions that I had about a memoir. And he said, well, you do realize that if you wrote a memoir and it came out during your father's centennial year, you would sell a few books. And I mean, it was like an incredibly pragmatic observation, but it was like he shot me out of a cannon, because I realized, oh my God, he's right. This is it. This is the moment, and it makes sense. And it was the right moment for me personally too, for a variety of reasons. And I literally ran home from that encounter with the book agent and started writing my memoir that very afternoon. And I threw out everything I wrote that day, but I started. And I eventually wrote a proposal that this agent was able to sell to HarperCollins, and here we are. And sure enough, it came out in the centennial year, and that did actually help the book a lot, and it got wonderful reviews, and I've been on the road talking about this book a lot, and I would have been with all of you tonight had everything gone normally, because I'm still very much on the road talking about my book. But this is our next best thing.
Right. Thanks, Jamie. I'm not sure if you mentioned before, but one of the reasons Jamie is outside is because there was a hailstorm up in Connecticut, and Jamie lost her internet. And so that's why she's outside on her cell phone. Anyway, to continue with the questions, one of the big reveals in the book has to do with your mother's letter. Now, I know that not everyone listening in has read the book, so
they've all read the book already?
Well, some have and some haven't, but but for those who haven't read the book, your mother's letter was written before your parents were married, and it revealed that your mother knew about your father's sexuality before their marriage. So my question is, had you never found that letter, how different would your thinking be about your parents' marriage?
Yeah, it's a great question, because finding that letter was really seismic for my brother and sister and me, because up until that time, we had no confirmation that they were going into their marriage with their eyes wide open, as it were. And it turns out that they were. And we found out about this quite recently, only like in the last 12 or 15 years tops. So it was a relatively new discovery. And I think it would have made a big difference if we had never found that letter. So I'm glad that we found it before I wrote the book, because it enabled me to understand much better that, you know, my parents knew that they were undertaking an experiment, a kind of bungee jump, and that it was going to be challenging for both of them. And it helps me admire them so much more for what they did, because they knew that what they were undertaking was not easy, not normal, and, you know, was full of, you know, possible stumbling blocks. But they mostly achieved what they set out to do, even though there were stumbling blocks and they stumbled a bunch of times. But overall, I would say that it was an incredibly successful undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. All right, well, a related question is, what was the most difficult aspect of writing the book? And is there anything that you wish you had excluded or included?
Oh, well, there's nothing I regret including. And I must add that all the way along from the very beginning, I told my brother Alexander and my sister Nina that they had total veto power over everything that I wrote in the book. And I showed them every draft that I wrote. And I told them that if there was anything in there that they did not like or did not approve of the way I told it or anything like that, that I would either extract it or change it, whatever it was that would work for them. Because what was of paramount importance to me was that my siblings be okay with what I was doing. And so it was deeply gratifying that they basically gave me the green light with every draft. They said, it's okay what you're doing, it's good, keep going, it's all okay. So that's how that went.
Hmm.
And in terms of what I could have put in that I didn't, I don't know. I mean, I could have written 3 books because I had so much material. So the bigger question is, what was I heartbroken about leaving out? You know, and my wonderful editor at HarperCollins, Jonathan J.O., made me cut so many things that I loved. And this happens to most authors. But I think what I most regret having had to cut was my joke appendix. Because in our family, the Jewish jokes, I think of them as a kind of, they're the DNA of Jewish culture. And they are the family jewels of DNA Jewish culture. And you know how it is, those jokes, they embody the essence of the sensibility that we all share, and they're so precious. And so I had hoped to refer to these, you know, various punchlines and jokes that most of us already know. And then at the back of the book, you see, I was going to have a joke appendix where the jokes would be written out in full. And then, you know, anytime there was a reference to a joke that people didn't know, I would be able to refer them to the appendix and they could read the joke in its entirety. But alas, my editor, Jonathan, correctly observed that when you write the jokes down, they're not it's an oral tradition. And so in the end, I had to cut the joke appendix and I was sad.
Well, I think we're all sad that we couldn't couldn't read them. And I wouldn't put you on the spot by asking if you recall a particularly good one, unless you do recall a particularly
Oh,
good one.
well, I mean, I can tell you a really fast one. Some of them are long, very long, and some of them are quite short. And this is one of the short ones. So, the Jewish mother gives her son 2 ties for his birthday. And so the next time he sees his mother, he says, "Look, Mom, where are your tie that you gave me for my birthday?" And she says, "What's the matter? You didn't like the other tie?" And you see the profundity of the joke is that she set him up. There was absolutely no way that he could do anything but insult her. So that's kind of the essence and the coolness, the wonder of that joke. But they all have that degree of meaning and intensity. So anyway, maybe one day I'll revisit the jokes.
Hmm. Well, anyway, that was a great one that you shared. It was yeah, that was good. Okay, my next question has to do with your father's body of work. So it's actually a two-part question. One is, what is your personal favorite in terms of one of his songs or shows or symphonies? And also, the second part of that question is, what is your opinion of the recent production of West Side Story that was on Broadway? And did you have any role at all in the production?
Oh, okay. So I get asked this question quite often, which is my favorite Bernstein piece. And the answer usually is whichever one I just heard, because I'm such a fan of his music. I think his music is marvelous. And the better you know it, the more you love it. I'm a big fan of his, it's a kind of violin concerto called Serenade, which I highly recommend. And of course, his Broadway shows are also fantastic. His theater work, Mass, is beyond belief wonderful. And then as to West Side Story, I mean, it is his best known and best loved work. And we love it a lot. And this Broadway revival, which alas is on hiatus because of all our recent unpleasantness, I hope it will have a chance to reopen and continue, pick up where it left off. Who knows what will happen, but we hope that will happen. Anyway, it was fascinating and very edgy, very different. It, those of you who heard about it know that it had a big empty stage and relied a lot on video, both live and pre-recorded. So it was very edgy and modern, and the dance was not Jerome Robbins, but Anna Teresa Keermeister. I never get her name correct. But anyway, this very interesting contemporary Dutch choreographer. So everything about it was like edgy and cool and contemporary. And, I am not what we like to call in our family a poulet de printemps, which, spring chicken. So I'm a little old fashioned. And so for me, the video thing in theater is hard for me, because when I go to the theater, I go to see live actors. And so I feel a little sorry when they're reduced to ants by their very enlarged projections above them. And I feel somehow that this is not ideal for a live actor. But the impact for the audience is tremendous. And there were moments in that production that took your breath away. So, it was pretty cool to watch.
Did you have any role in it in terms of input, or not at all?
Our role was only as far as the music went, of course. That's where we get to weigh in. And there were some changes, and we were not always happy about them, but we, chose our battles and allowed what seemed to be working okay, that was different. And, we tried to be accommodating wherever possible. And by and large, it was musically fantastic. The band was just superb. It was just musically everything you could hope for, really. It was just some of the cues that were changed, and so that took some adjusting for us. But in terms of the performances, musically, it was fantastic. And Alexander Geminiani, the conductor, was spot on. I'm going to try something, okay? I'm going to go inside because it's really cold out here.
Yeah, I figured you were
getting cold
for a while. Yeah.
But you know what? If the connection is bad, you tell me, and I'll just come back out with more layers. Okay?
Okay. All right. That sounds that sounds good. We'll give it a try.
Give me a second while I make the adjustment here. Okay?
Sure.
One moment. How does it sound so far?
So far, so good.
Okay, good. Sorry, I have to do it in here. It's just too cold out there. Okay, Herbie, get in. I'm talking to my dog right now. Herbie, get inside. Hell's a poppin'. And we're also trying to fix the internet, and it's okay. He can sing. So, and my brother is coming through. Okay.
All right. Yeah, so far so good. Just get settled, and then we can resume.
All right. Well, I'll be thrilled if we can do it from in here because it was getting really cold out there.
Yeah. No, I'm not surprised. That's why when you said you were going outside, I'm thinking, well, I know it must be cold there. So.
Yeah, it's pretty cold, and now I can take off my really unbecoming hat.
Actually, that was cute, but. So, all right, so I'll move on to the next question, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, the next question you pretty much already addressed. I was going to ask you how your siblings, Alexander and Nina, feel about your book.
Well, you already asked me about that.
Well, yeah.
I explained that, that I gave them total veto power.
Right.
Over the book. And that I wouldn't put in anything that they didn't approve of. And they gave me the green light, the thumbs up. So they were okay with it. They were good with it.
Right. All right.
The only part about my book that I regret a little bit, actually, is that for a while there, there were a lot of events around the book and a lot of attention. I was getting a lot of attention, and I had the sinking feeling that I was putting them back in the same scenario that we grew up with, where we all had to put up with the fuss being made over our dad. And now it had come back around in this watered down way that I was putting my brother and sister through, and I felt a little bad about that. But, it was so watered down, and it did subside. So it was just a temporary unpleasantness for them, I think.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question, I'm not sure if it would be tough to answer. I mean, what do you imagine your parents would think about your book?
Oh, well, it's a very good question. I think my dad would have liked it a lot. It's my mother that I worry about a little bit because she was so private. She didn't like to talk about stuff, but I will also say that I think one of the reasons I felt compelled to write the book was to finally put together and find the words to express all the things that we were unable to talk about at the time when my parents were alive and they were going through all their stuff. And, back in those days, when my mother had her mastectomy in 1974, this was before Betty Ford, before pink ribbons, and talking about breast cancer was like you didn't talk about it. And my mother was such an intensely private person that for her, it was doubly horrifying to have to go through this shameful disease. And she never wanted to talk about it. So that was one thing. And then 2 years later, she and my father separated because my father went off to live with this young man. And this was another thing nobody could talk about. A husband and wife separating so that the husband could go live with a man, like nobody could talk about that either. And so all of these very intense, fraught situations were ones that we couldn't really talk about at the time. And so I think that was one of the big motivators for me to write this book, was to finally find the we were all going through.
Now, I think you faded out towards the end. We couldn't
Oh, I did?
Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can. I think we just missed maybe the last sentence.
Oh, well, I was just saying that, one of the big motivators for my writing the book was to finally find the words to express all these situations that we were unable to talk about at the time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, well, no, so it sounds like it was a therapeutic experience in a way to write the book.
Yes, therapeutic and cathartic for sure.
Right. Actually, that was the word I was thinking of before. Yeah. Okay, calling the book "Famous Father Girl." How does that moniker influence your own career choices, both in terms of music and other careers that you were attracted to?
I spent so much time in my life trying to distance myself from my father and somehow doing a really bad job of it and being very ambivalent about it. On the one hand, I was very proud of him and very excited to be connected to him. But on the other hand, who was I independent of my last name? And so, all of this is very much a part of what the book is about. And so, it took a while to sort it out. And when it came to naming the book, the reason I settled on this title was partly because it was like a joke on everything I was trying to do. Trying to put the distance between myself and my father, which I could never do anyway. And all the way back in second grade, my classmate Lisa used to call me that to tease me. Famous Father Girl. And I ended up thinking this was a great title because, first of all, it's kind of funny. And second of all, it kind of pokes you in the eye. It's a little irreverent, which I liked. And also, it makes no bones about what this book is about. I was finally confronting it head on. Yes, I'm Leonard Bernstein's daughter. That's the deal. And here's what the deal was. And if you like it, fine. And if you don't like it, fine. But this is what it is. So that was kind of the sensibility behind that choice of title.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now changing to a different topic. You said in your book, my father's way of being religious was quite personal. He seemed mainly to explore it through his reading and music. So maybe his own kids' indifference didn't bother him too much, he hoped. So my question is, how did your father's relationship to Judaism influence you? And what's your present day relationship to Judaism? And of course, one of the reasons I'm asking this question is this is the congregation Beth Elohim sponsoring this. So obviously this is a topic that we're interested in.
Right. Sorry. Come on, Ziggy, get out of here. Sorry, dealing with the dogs again. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. That is a big question. And it's complicated. My father's own upbringing in Massachusetts with his immigrant parents who came over from Ukraine in the early 20th century was very traditional Eastern European Orthodox Jewish. And that was kind of the world he grew up in. But once he was an adult, he found his own way to express his spirituality and his own connection to Judaism, which was profound, but he found his own way to express it. And so if you're looking for how he expressed it, go to the music, because that's where it all is. You can really hear him wrestling with all his demons and asking all the tough questions in the music and through the music. In terms of how we grew up, I mean, you know, once my father married my mother, Felicia Montealegre, raised Catholic in Chile, it was clear that both of them were going to carve out their own spiritual path together and find their own way to express their spirituality. So when it came to our own lives in the house, like many houses in the United States that are multi-religious backgrounds, we did a little of this and a little of that. So we lit the Hanukkah candles and we had the Christmas tree, and we have to this day rip-roaring seders. And then on Easter Sunday, we would usually have a little egg hunt for the little kids. So a little of this, a little of that. But I think all of us feel our spirituality primarily through music.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I didn't want to interrupt you. So it sounds like it's as you started out saying, that it's complicated to this day.
Yeah, it is. And I should add that my brother was bar mitzvahed, mainly to make his grandfather Sam Bernstein happy, which it did, very much so. But tellingly, my sister and I were somehow let off the hook when we didn't have any particular interest in pursuing being bat mitzvahed, and we were not we were not pushed in that direction because we were just girls, I think, and it didn't matter that much to Grandpa. It was all about the boy. It was, as I say in the book, it was the one time I was grateful to be a second-class citizen.
And so so just, I hope you don't mind me pursuing this a little bit more. So in terms of imparting any sort of Judaism to your children, I mean, how was that done or not done?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, because it was done in its sort of subtle, inevitable way. And we just found out in just how thorough it was, because since we're all, incarcerated in our various domiciles at the moment, there was no possibility of our Seder. And we were all going to be at my sister Nina's house in New York, and that was the big plan. My brother's family, my sister's family, and my family, and, the whole mishpacha, like we do every year. And all of a sudden, it was completely off. And my brother and sister and I were all so preoccupied with everything else that was going on that we didn't give the Seder a second thought. And what do you think happened? The next generation stepped up to the plate. And my daughter, Frankie, and my brother's daughter, Anya, and Nina, my sister's daughter, Anna, the three of them got together and cooked up a way for us to have a Zoom Seder, which we did from our three. My daughter, Frankie, is in New Haven with her husband, and I'm here in Connecticut with my brother, and our sister Nina is in upstate New York, and the three houses all got on Zoom together, and we even managed to sing Dayenu without having a train wreck. It was amazing. And it was so touching. And everybody cooked what they could, and we said the prayers, and we, my daughter made matzah, which these were levels of participation that had never happened before, and it turned out to be incredibly meaningful and touching, in like way more than ever before. And so, talk about turning lemons into Jewish lemonade.
Oh, that's a nice that's a nice story. Well, and a related question is, I mean, how does your relationship with your own children, how has it been affected by the complex relationship that you had with your mother and father?
Well, You know, while our dad was alive, my brother and sister and I were always trying to distance from the enormity of him. And it was only after he died that we realized, oh, it's our job to kind of protect his legacy and foster it and take care of it and make sure that it's cared for wherever it lands physically and all of that. But we had never thought about all of that for 1 second until he was no longer physically with us. And I suspect that the same thing will happen to our kids, that they will not really perceive their own responsibility and participation in the Leonard Bernstein legacy until their own parental generation is no longer with them. And then they'll realize that they'll have to step up to the plate. That's my guess.
Mhm. Okay. I'm just thinking about that. All right. Well, we'll leave that. We'll go on to another. Well, actually, at this point, do you feel like reading another excerpt of your book?
Sure, if you like, I can do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why don't we do that now? And then
Okay.
Then we'll continue with some other questions.
Okay. This excerpt is it's a little melancholy, but it's very apt for right now because this is an excerpt describing my father's very last concert that he conducted at Tanglewood in August of 1990, just a couple of months before he died. He was very sick and he had terrible lung disease, and so he could barely get a breath and he was on oxygen most of the time. And I think that there are so many people who are experiencing this right now. This is the very essence of the COVID nightmare. And so anyway, this is a description of that concert. So it was a Sunday afternoon concert, which, you know, my father did one of them every summer and they were always sold out. And somehow the weather was always great whenever it was the Lenny concert. And so at Tanglewood, they used to call it Lenny weather, which meant that, you know, the weather would be awesome and the lawn will be full and all of that. The big Sunday afternoon concert at Tanglewood was sold out as usual. But in yet another ominous sign, the fabled Lenny weather didn't appear. It was cold and rainy. We had to bundle up Grandma with multiple blankets to keep her feet warm. My father got through Benjamin Britten's Sea Interludes, but he'd assigned a newly orchestrated version of his own piece, Arias and Barcarolles, to the assistant conductor, Carl St. Clair. The composer himself couldn't conduct it. His brain was so oxygen deprived by that point that he couldn't track the complexities of his own music. Even the rows of oxygen tanks in his dressing room backstage weren't helping. Luckily, he could conduct the last piece on the program, Beethoven's Seventh, from memory, muscle memory. Or probably even he could have done it in his sleep. He was, in fact, almost unconscious by that point in the concert from the sheer lack of air in his lungs and brain. During the third movement, Daddy was racked by a coughing fit so severe that for a while he was sagging against the podium railing, struggling to catch what little breath he had. Phyllis Newman, our family friend, was sitting to my left. We gripped each other's arms in horror. The orchestra played on, rudderless, until my father managed to collect himself and take the symphony the rest of the way to its glorious finish line. There is no greater finale in all the Beethoven symphonies. At the end of the piece, as the audience roared its approval, my sister Nina and I caught each other's eye. We were shattered from anxiety. Our father came out for his bow, tiny, ashen, and nearly lost inside the white suit that now hung so loosely on him, it looked as if it had been tailored for some other species. Ugh. Sorry, bit of a downer there.
Well, but it's a good, I mean, it's a very evocative passage. And it sort of leads into my next question. Um, do you visit your father's grave in Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery? And do you have any thoughts about his gravesite?
Well, as I said in the book, and I'll say it here in more detail, I don't feel like he's there. I don't feel like either of my parents are really in that place. And my own way of expressing spirituality is different. And so I don't go to Greenwood Cemetery on a regular basis. I have been there many times, of course. And I've been there with others, including our nanny, Julia Vega, whom you all read about in the book, if you've read the book, who more and more I have come to understand plays a gigantic role in who I am today. And she lived so much longer than my mother did that by the time she died in about 12, 15 years ago, she had been in our lives more than twice as long as our biological mother. And she was the one who was around, you know, when the three of us had our kids. She was the one who got the grandchildren. And she was the one with whom I processed that whole mother-daughter dynamic that changes so much when you have your own kids and then you understand your mother better and all that stuff that happens in that dynamic. That all happened with Julia. And Julia was the one with whom I would go to Greenwood Cemetery because she was raised Catholic and she was still very Catholic. And she felt that her patrones, my mother and father, were in that cemetery. And so I would go there with Julia. And she was my connector to that environment. But now that Julia is no longer with us either, and by the way, she's in Greenwood Cemetery too, in a different plot, but she is there. I haven't been there in quite a while. It's a beautiful place. It would be so beautiful right this minute in springtime with everything blooming. It would be gorgeous, but I can't really go there right now. But I've been thinking of Julia a lot during this you know, the great hunkering down, because here I am in our house in Connecticut, which she took care of to such an intense degree, and now I'm taking care of it to such an intense degree, and I find myself becoming overrun with the spirit of Julia, and I go around like, you know, scrubbing floors and vacuuming baseboards and doing, you know, washing and cleaning and scrubbing and everything's like, ah! And I think in part this is therapeutic, but also it's a way of having Julia inhabit our environment. It's like that's a way of evoking her. So I've been thinking about her a lot lately.
Thank you. How would you imagine if your father were alive? How would you imagine your father would react to our present day pandemic situation?
Yeah, I thought you might ask me that, and I think about it all the time, and I think the hardest part for him would be the no hugging, because you know he was the most tactile human being, and he had to hug everybody, you know, in his by now infamous ends of concerts where he would go around the entire orchestra and hug everybody. And, you know, people made fun of him for it, but it was also what was adorable about him was that he was just all heart and he just couldn't help himself. And so what in the world would he be doing now? And, you know, he had a little bit of that. I'm just lowering the lights a little. It doesn't work. He had a little bit of that thing where he thought he would be okay if he looked directly into a solar eclipse. That's the only similarity that I would ever draw between him and our current commander-in-chief. But anyway, he did have that sense of, I can do anything, and I can, it's part of the personality that's able to achieve great things. And so maybe he would think, oh, it's okay, I can go out there and shake hands and hug everybody, and I'll be okay, and they'll be okay. And I'm guessing that he might have had that sensibility. And it would have been awful for him to be all locked up in a house and not go out and not see people. I think that would have been very hard for him.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, I can understand what you're saying, because it would just be so contrary to how you portrayed him, of who he was essentially.
Right. But the other part of it, and we don't have to get into this, but just in terms of the sheer political situation that we're in right now, he would be apoplectic. Apoplectic. And I'm sorry for that reason that he's not around, because he would have found wonderful creative ways to express our frustration and outrage. I'm sure of it. And he probably would have found music to write that would have comforted us too. But what he left behind is pretty comforting as it is. So at least we have that.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. So in writing the book, did you learn anything new about yourself?
Oh, yeah, I did. I mean, as I mentioned before, it was indeed very cathartic to write the book, and therapeutic. And I gather this happens to authors pretty often, but it definitely happened to me that as you're writing the book, you discover something else that it's about. And I think I was about 3/4 of the way through the first draft when it occurred to me that, oh, this book is actually about how I made my peace with music. And I hadn't exactly understood that that's where the book was going, but that is where it was going. And it very much became what the book was about, that I had this very complicated, tormented relationship to music, which of course is a metaphor for my complicated, tormented relationship with my father himself. And so, the resolution of one equaled the resolution of the other. But what I came to understand as I wrote the book was that this, for a long time I was trying to be a singer-songwriter and driving myself crazy, and I was so neurotic about performing, and everything drove me nuts. In the book, I talk about having one foot on the gas and the other foot on the brake simultaneously, which was driving me crazy. But then later on in life, after my father had died, and I accidentally got into this whole thing about talking about music and narrating educational concerts and all of that, after doing it for, 5 years, 10 years, 12, 15, 18 years and on, I realized, oh, this kind of inadvertently solved my problem, because it gave me the opportunity to stay in the world of music and be useful, be contributing something that was helping people enjoy the music more, but I just wasn't making the music with my own body. And so I had no neurosis anymore. I was just enjoying myself and doing something I was good at, which is talking in front of people. Talking in front of people, it's not my problem. I have a lot of other problems. That's not one of them. And so I found a way to express myself that worked for myself and for everybody else. And I didn't see it coming. It wasn't a thing I had sought out. It just kind of happened by accident. But it did turn out to be the solution to my lifelong conundrum about music. So in the book, I describe it as having cut off the ailing limb to allow the rest of the organism to thrive. So I'm a kind of musical amputee, but I'm a pretty cheerful, high-functioning musical amputee. I love what I do, and it makes other people happy. So, and I have a kind of musician's life, or I did until quite recently, on the road, going to the rehearsals, hanging out after the gig, trading airport horror stories, you know, all the things that musicians do.
Mm.
And all my pals are musicians. So it worked out great.
Mm.
And I hope I can get back to it one day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's interesting. So it sounds like you really portrayed your own journey in the book. While you started out talking about your father, but your own journey was woven throughout, and it was yeah, and there were many different levels to it. But it's yeah, I think that's interesting. What do you most want readers to take away from your book?
Oh, well, in terms of learning more about my dad, I would hope that they would get a sense of how multifarious he was. You know, if you've only seen Leonard Bernstein conducting on TV, let's say, you see a guy in tails and everything's very formal and he's on a podium and he's all intense and you think, oh, what a scary, formidable, intense, serious guy. And you would perhaps never guess that he was hilarious and he had this total funny bone. And that's why really early in the book, I talk about how he shared with us all the vaudeville gags that he remembered from his childhood. And he was always telling the really good Jewish jokes. That's why I know them. I learned most of them from my dad. So, you know, he had this earthiness and this funniness. And I'm hoping that I was able to convey that in the book.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I personally think you conveyed it very well. Okay, the next question is a two-part question. Okay, well, the first part is in the David Denby a June 2018 review in the New Yorker. He mentions two Hollywood biopics starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Bradley Cooper. So can you tell us anything about the status of those projects, and are you involved with either project?
Okay, so it is true that at one crazy moment, there were all of a sudden two different biopic type projects being developed simultaneously. And it was kind of a mess. And in the end, the project that went forward was the one that was being developed by Bradley Cooper. And he is starring in it, he's directing it, co-producing it, and co-writing it. So it is a big Bradley Cooper project. And it was slated to start filming in about a year from now. But I'm guessing that that's been postponed just because of everything in the whole wide world being postponed. But we hope that it'll all come to fruition eventually.
Are you consulting on it?
Well, sort of. I mean, my brother and sister and I are regularly consulted by Bradley about all sorts of issues. Mm-hmm. But you know, we gave him the go-ahead to develop this project, and so, you know, it's a go. Mm-hmm. Very exciting. Very exciting.
It is very exciting. I think it's certainly something that we're all going to anticipate and go out to see when it's done and when we're able to go out again to see.
Won't that be great? Can you imagine how much fun it will all be to go to a movie theater and see a really gorgeous movie on a big screen? Which brings me to the other movie project, which is the remake of West Side Story, that is supposed to open on December 18th. But who knows? Like, do you think that we'll all be in movie theaters by December 18th? I don't know. And I wonder whether Steven Spielberg, the director, will decide to postpone the opening or not. I have no idea what will happen with that. Mm-hmm. But I can't wait to see that movie. The little that I saw of it being made, it looked so incredible. I'm very excited to see it. So fasten your seatbelts for that. I just don't know how and when we will see it, but we will see it. It's made already.
Well, it's an exciting prospect. Did Spielberg consult with you at all on that one?
Well, again, well, it's different from the biopic. A movie that's about our dad's life puts us more in the position of having something to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to West Side Story, we have a say in the music.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only department where we have a say, because there are 4 authors: Jerome Robbins, Arthur Lawrence, Steve Sondheim, and Bernstein.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a different situation. But we were very much involved in the music.
Right.
And the music, I mean, I can't tell you how exciting it was to go to those recording sessions with the New York Philharmonic, conducted by Gustavo Dudamel, if you can just imagine how thrilling all that was. So, yeah, it sounds great.
Do you happen to know who's starring in the Spielberg movie?
Of course I do,
No.
but it's nobody you've ever heard of. It's all really, really a young cast.
I see.
It's the only person people might have heard of, and you probably have only heard of him if you're really young, which from the looks of it, you may not be, is the guy who plays Tony, is the actor Ansel Elgort, who has been in a number of movies. Maybe you saw Baby Driver, he was in that. And he's kind of a teen heartthrob, and very handsome and a marvelous actor. And so he's a known quantity. But everyone else in the movie is very, very young and as yet unknown. I'm certain that the young actress who plays Maria is going to become a superstar, because she's so incredibly charismatic and beautiful and talented. Oh my God, you'll see. And then the only person in the cast that people will know is, you remember the original movie of West Side Story, the actress who played Anita, Rita Moreno? She's in this movie.
Oh, that's
and
great.
Now she plays the woman who runs the candy store, who in this version of the screenplay is the widow of Doc. And so this was the idea of Tony Kushner, who rewrote this screenplay. And Tony Kushner is a complete genius. And he came up with this idea that Doc died. And so his widow, Valentina, is running the store. And Valentina is Puerto Rican, you see. And so they had this mixed marriage, which makes Valentina all the more invested in what's happening for Tony with Maria. And so it adds so much more emotion and connectedness in the story. It was a brilliant idea. And it's very touching that now she plays the oldest person in the cast.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I hope we all get to see it on the big screen.
Me too.
So, what are the current projects that you're involved with, and are there any projects that are literary? Since this book was so well reviewed, have you thought of any other books, or are your other current projects not literary?
Oh, I'm hard at work, or I was until the recent interruptions, and now who can have a coherent thought about anything? But I have been working for the better part of the last year on a new book, which is also personal and sort of memoir-y. But you know, when the whole COVID thing kicked in, it was such an upheaval of everything that it really puts all of life in a different context. As my daughter calls it, it's the before time. I mean, it really is, you know, like a different world. And so, first of all, I've just been so distracted with everything else going on that I haven't worked on this book for a couple of months now. But the other thing is that I feel like, how do I process stories about what happened before in the context of what we're going through now? It changes everything.
Right.
So I'm waiting for the day when I'm ready to plunge back in and figure out how to do that. And right this second, I don't know the answer to that question. But I've written 10 chapters. It's virtually written, but it's not.
Right, right.
There's more to do.
Right. Well, I can understand how, the current times would, make it a challenging project. Right.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right. Well, I'm sure that's true for artists of all kinds right now.
Right.
That, how do you make what you're working on meaningful or relevant given what we're all going through? How can anybody's personal story have any meaning or significance for anybody in the context of what we're all going through now, which is just so calamitous and larger than us and everything?
Right. No, it can't, it's not, we're far from business as usual. So, and that
ever so far.
Right. And that has to carry over in every aspect. Right.
I keep thinking about forest fires and the way a big forest fire will burn off all the old growth, and then that brings all this sunlight and fresh air down to the forest floor, and all these new things will grow up, right? And maybe this is like that we're going to lose a lot, if not most of what we knew before, the stores, the restaurants, the theater companies, the orchestras. I don't know how much all of what we knew before will survive. New stuff will come up, though. Right. It just remains to be seen how it will all shake out. I don't know.
Right. That's so true. And one question is, there've been a number of different biographies written about your father. What are your opinions of these other biographies?
Oh.
Do you feel like offering any opinions about these other biographies?
Oh, I don't mind talking about them, but there is one biography that is kind of the most official of the bunch and the most accurate of the bunch, and it's by Humphrey Burton, who was a big gun at the BBC and was the director of all my father's concert videos, and was just knighted by Queen Elizabeth last month at the age of 91. Anyway, Humphrey Burton is a great person, and he wrote a very good biography. It's very thorough. And so if you're trying to just get the overview in the most accurate possible way, that's the book that I would steer people to, but it is long. Then there is the one that I would least recommend, which is the sort of tabloidy one by Joan Pizer, which is awful. So forget that one. And then just about 10 years ago, there was a really wonderful book about my dad by what is his name?
Sean.
Alan Sean.
Was he a personal assistant of your father's for a while?
No, not that one.
Oh, not that one. Okay. All right.
Alan Sean is a music professor at Bennington, I believe. And he wrote a really beautiful book about my dad. It's mostly about the music, but it's much more. And it's not that long, but it just is beautiful. He kind of caught the vibe. So I recommend that one. And then the Rolling Stone writer Jonathan Cott wrote a wonderful book it's based on a conversation that he had over dinner with my dad. I think it's called Dinner with Lenny. So that's a really good book, but it's not a full biography. And then my father's one-time assistant, Charlie Harmon, wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago, and it has lots of good stories in it. It's okay, and you can take a look at that one too.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of material out there, which is good, which is great. Now, in going back to your book, I know you mentioned before that you kept journals, but I was wondering, did you have to do a lot of research for your book? And in doing your research, were there any special instances of cooperation or non-cooperation that you would want to tell us about?
Well, I didn't do the kind of research that you might normally do for a book like this because I didn't intend it to be a biography. So I wasn't doing that kind of research.
Mm.
And it was very personal and from my own experience. And that's why my journals were absolutely invaluable. And I didn't keep them every second of my life, but I kept them for large swaths of my life. And they came in, they were just the best possible resource. Because a lot of times I would ask my brother and sister, remember that time when we went to that thing and who was there, remember, and what was the music? And they could never remember anything. And so in the end, my version of events is the one that stands because I was the only one who wrote stuff down. So that's the value of writing stuff down, is that your version of events winds up being the version of record. But in any case, it meant that I had to go back and reread all my journals, and that took forever. I'm kind of verbose, and I had to slog through these endless entries, and mostly what they were about was boyfriends, 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 and that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for the stuff about my family, about my dad, and it was in there, but I had to slog through these endless fulminations about stuff I was no longer remotely interested in. So I would, read and read and turn the pages saying to myself, shut up, shut up, shut up. But I did eventually find what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, my father's archives are housed at the Library of Congress. And I went down there a couple of times, not so much to look for documents, but to look for photographs. And I found incredible treasures, just ridiculous treasures. So that was really fun to do.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Yeah, I have one final question having to do with what you like to read. Do you like to read memoirs? Do you have, if so, do you have any favorites? And also, are there particular books, either novels or nonfiction, that either move you particularly or evoke your parents to you?
Oh.
So it's a multifaceted question.
It is a multifaceted question, but we love talking about books, right? While I was writing my book, I read a couple of memoirs. And interestingly, the one that really made the biggest impression on me was by Christopher Buckley, who wrote a really beautiful book called Losing Mum and Pup, which is about the deaths of his mother and his father. His father was William F. Buckley. And, coming from a dyed-in-the-wool, lefty, liberal family, William F. Buckley was not our favorite guy. But this book was so charming and so well written, and it made me love Bill Buckley in spite of myself because of the way the son evoked him in the book. And the book really influenced me in my own writing because I so admired the way Christopher Buckley, who is largely a humor writer, was able to mix together the humor and the grief and the pathos and kind of make it all weave together in a way that felt very lifelike. And I really admired that. And I strove to do the same thing in my book, to strike that balance between the serious and the levity, So that was a book that made a big impression on me. And now, what am I reading now? I just finished a marvelous novel by a classmate of mine from Harvard, who is also known as a poet, but this was a novel. His name is Brad Lighthouser. I don't know if anybody's heard of Brad Lighthouser. He's a very esteemed poet and a really good writer. I mean, a really good writer. And he wrote this amazing book called The Promise of Elsewhere. And it's just this kind of eccentric yarn about this dweeby art professor from some kind of B-level college in the Midwest who decides to go on this journey in his midlife where he's going to visit the great architectural marvels of the world. And first he's going to see the Colosseum in Rome, and then he's going to go to the Taj Mahal, and then he's got these places all mapped out. And he starts out on this journey, and he gets to Rome and immediately goes off the rails, and everything goes a different way from how you would expect. And he winds up in, of all places, Greenland, where you can be guaranteed to never find any human-made architectural marvel. But he is completely enchanted by the icebergs. And that may not sound like much of a plot, but the way Brad Lighthouser wrote this book, it is so beautiful and funny and well-written and wow. So I'm a very slow reader, as was my dad. We can only read as fast as we can hear. We're basically reading aloud into our heads. That's how we read. So it takes me forever to read a book. So I have been reading a few pages of this Brad Lighthouser book every night since I got to Connecticut 6 weeks ago. And I finally finished it about 3 or 4 nights ago. And it was a good read, so I recommend it. And so now I have to find something else to read, but I've started this amazing crime thriller called Bluebird, Bluebird. Has anyone heard of that? No. It is, and I forget the name of the woman who wrote it. She's African-American, and it's about an African-American Texas Ranger and what he's discovering down in Texas. So it's very intense when it comes to race relations, and the plot is amazing. I can't put it down. So that's the latest.
Wow. Well, you're so enthusiastic about all 3 of these books that it makes me want to put all 3 of them on my personal list. and I never thought I'd be interested in reading anything by Buckley or he's a Buckley's son, but still I assume a conservative. But anyway, but no, I love the way you describe all 3 books because you make them sound, great. I'm just curious. Did your father or your mother have any favorite books of theirs that you recall?
Oh, they were always reading. It was all about books in our house. And there are piles of books still everywhere, which is so different from the current generation. Nowadays, people don't have physical books that often. And so, bookshelves are not the story of your life the way they are in our generation. But my mother loved nonfiction. But she read a lot of fiction, and then one day she decided, I'm done with novels, I just want to read real stuff. But back in her novel days, I remember her reading Proust again, and complaining of stomach aches because the volume was so heavy that it would lean on her stomach when she was lying in bed, and she would get these stomach aches from reading Proust. And she also loved Jane Austen. So she was very classical that way. And my father was a huge Nabokov fan. Pale Fire was like one of our touchstone books in our family. And my father almost wrote an opera on Lolita. And I'm actually glad he didn't, because that just would have been such a can of worms. Boy, am I glad he didn't wind up doing that. Isn't life complicated enough without trying to write an opera on Lolita? Yeesh.
Well, that was interesting. Well, Jamie, this conversation was great. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you all for sticking in there, because I'm sorry for all the interruptions and disruptions and bad connections and everything. I'm sorry.
Well, like I said, it all started with that hailstorm. So it
did.
It was a act of nature, act of God, I guess. But
despite it all, it was really beautiful. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, this was really wonderful.
Thank you.
So I want to formally go through a couple of thank yous here before we end. So So first, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. People from Congregation Beth Elohim, book group members from CBE, and other people from CBE, and friends, both real life friends and Facebook friends. Thank you all for coming tonight. A big thank you to Nate Jaffe. His assistance has been invaluable in both planning and executing this event. I also want to thank Louise Crawford, who I'm not sure, I see Caroline, her sister is clapping. I assume Louise is out there somewhere, because Louise is the one who introduced me to Jamie. And so I wanted to thank her. She's a friend and a colleague from Brooklyn Social Media. But most of all, I want to thank Jamie, because Jamie shared her life with us. And first she shared it by writing the memoir, by writing what I think is a wonderful, insightful memoir. So that's the first way you shared it. And then you shared it again by graciously agreeing to discuss it with us. So once again, thank you, and we're very grateful for your gracious participation in this.
Well, thanks to all of you. Couldn't do it without you guys. And thank you so much, Linda, for hanging in there.
Oh, you're welcome.
Nate.
You're welcome, and take care, and for everybody, stay well, and
stay well, stay safe, everybody.
Right, and keep reading.
Yeah.